never had felt more alone in my life. Going into Seattle, like, that's a whole different beast. You will make lifelong friendships, but I still got an occurrence for it. Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name is Marina. I am a mainline flight attendant here in the United States. Finally, I'm coming out with my 6-month recap video. We're gonna talk about probation, mental health, budgeting. We're gonna talk about crash pads, my experience with being new in the aviation world, and we're gonna talk about it all. So, of course, everything in this video that I'm going to be discussing are my views, and they do not reflect the views of my employer. I'm here to give you my perspective with completely fresh new eyes. Hopefully this is able to answer some of your questions or concerns, help you navigate through this time if you're going through the same thing. Feel free to join me, grab a holiday drink, and let's chat. On my phone here, I have a list of questions that I have gotten or things I'm going to be talking about that have occurred in the 6 months of my probationary period with my current airline. Let's pick up where it all started, and that is training. I'm not going to talk about training too much in this video, but I will kind of touch base on it a little bit. If you are interested in my training experience, I do have 7 videos out, and that regards to me moving into my hotel, weeks 1 through 6 of my experience going through training. We found out our bases very tail end of the first week, and for those who don't know, I was based in Anchorage, Alaska for the first 2 months of my probationary period. Upon finding out my base, unfortunately it wasn't where I live, and for those who don't know, I do live in the Washington state. Ideally I would want Seattle as my base. Our class had the options of LAX or Anchorage, Alaska. LAX wasn't for me, although it sounded kind of nice. With LAX there's 3 other code terminals. Number 1, I checked into the crash pads. They were kind of pricey. Number 2, the traffic. That's a beast that I don't think I could truly handle. I didn't want to bring my car. Definitely could have made it work, but ideally I didn't want to do that. Give you my last reason, which is number 4. Most of my class actually was based in Anchorage, Alaska, and being completely new to this, I kind of didn't want to separate from my class. Decided, you know what, I'm just gonna go with the majority of my class to Anchorage and just live it up there. I'll be able to hang out with them, probably more than likely fly with them, and thirdly, crash pad with them. We'll touch base on the crash pad here in a bit. Upon graduation, later that evening is when we officially started our probationary period, and so that is a total of 6 months on probation with the company. Yes, I got interviewed, got a CJO, I went through training, I passed training and successfully graduated, but that didn't mean I was solidified within the company as a flight attendant. With my previous experience with other jobs, I've never had a probationary period before, so this was entirely new for me. It was a whole new thing to navigate. It did bring a lot of nerves to a lot of us that had graduated, because like, woo, we made it, but we were still stressed out. We made it all this way. Even the thought that we could not make it through probation is kind of scary, because we worked so hard to get to the point where we were. You know, training is not the easiest thing in the world. So after finding out the base, immediately I submitted to do a base transfer to Seattle. I wasn't granted that transfer right away, but on the 3rd month, which is July, I was granted that. So at least I knew eventually I would make it to Seattle, so I had to figure out my 2 months in Anchorage until I could get to Seattle. With that, you are encouraged to have a crash pad. For those who don't know what crash pads are, a crash pad is more of just temporary living that is a shared space with other commuting flight attendants and pilots that don't live in base. Usually it's a month-to-month basis, sometimes they're not. It all depends on the crash pad you find, or you can kind of have crash pads that are basically based in hotels. I think it's called like hotelcrashpads.com or something like that. Most cities have them, but Alaska didn't have that, so I had to resort to an actual like shared space. I was in an all-female crash pad, and there are crash pads that are only males, that are blended, that will have female and males. Crash pad prices vary on availability, on location, on like the amenities, so to speak, that they provide. Like, do they have a shared car? Do they have shared rooms, private rooms? Like, it just, is it a cold bed? Is it a hot bed? That could basically change the price of a crash pad. Some crash pads I saw that were like $350. I've seen some for like $500, but it was like you got like a car, a parking pass, and your own private bedroom. so that's more pricey. So it just depends what you're willing to pay. If you are more on a budget, you're more likely gonna have to go with a shared bedroom situation. If you have more freedom in your budget, then getting a private room and maybe like a few extra amenities along with that. Some people kind of just live out of their crash pads, and some crash pads only allow you to be there for only like 14 nights out of the whole month. So, and then they'll charge you per extra night that you're there. So there's just all these different variations of crash pads and how you find a crash pad if you are looking. So for us, we were just provided a resource Facebook page where we could go find crash pads, specifically where our base was. Different Facebook groups for different bases, and that's how I was able to find a crash pad. I was told the company, they favor that you live, you know, pretty much where your base is, but for a lot of people, they just commute, and that's totally fine. So on week 1 of finding out my base, I had 5 weeks to figure out a crash pad. I think I figured out a crash pad maybe like on week 4. To be honest, I kind of took a bit because a lot of crash pads want like deposits. It's tricky when you're recommended to get a crash pad because you're still making your way through training. It's just a lot of things to figure out. I think that's why it can make it kind of stressful, just, you know, the training itself, but then you're trying to figure out once you're out of training, like how you're gonna, you know, make it to your base, especially if you don't live there, and just the living situation and what your plan of attack is to commute to and from. Since my class had the unique situation of only being provided 4 days to get to base, the only challenge I think I faced where I was a little bit stressed out is that since I graduated on April 26th, which was like a Friday, I had Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday to basically move to Alaska. So yes, I did have those 4 days, but technically it felt like 3. Since we're all pretty junior, we either got AM or PM reserve, so none of us got lines. Since I was an AM reserve for my first month, I started at midnight on the 1st, so I essentially needed to be in base the day prior. You can't just show up last minute. You can't be in the air flying at the time of your reserve starting, even though you don't get used. We cannot be within 2 hours of flying distance of our reserve block starting. There's this rule that we have to be within 2 hours driving of our base, but that doesn't apply when it comes to flying. So I had to make sure that I landed in Anchorage before midnight. I happened to take the last flight out on April 30th, and I was scheduled to land at like 11:30 p.m. and my reserve block started at midnight, and for any reason that flight got delayed and it pushed me past midnight, like that would not be good. So that's why I took out the first flight in the morning. And the cool thing about, you know, being a commuter, and that is helpful at times, is that you get something that's called commuter status. When I'm commuting into base from Seattle to Anchorage, Alaska, I pretty much get bumped up at the top of the list, so I'm more likely to make a flight, but that doesn't always guarantee that you'll make a flight. So that's why it's really important that you give yourself multiple flight options prior to your start to get to base, because you just never know. They did provide hotel accommodations for us, so I did get accommodated in a hotel for like the first week, and then after that I pretty much was living in my crash pad for the whole month of May. Now moving forward into the crash pad situation, luckily it was all of my classmates, so it felt more of home to me because I was familiar with the people, and we were all just trying to navigate this new period in life together, this new state. A lot of us have never been to Alaska before. There were some people in my training class that, you know, lived in the state of Alaska, but the majority of us did not. We had a total of 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. Each bedroom had 2 bunk beds. We had 4 girls in each room, so it was a total of 8 of us living in this shared living space with 1 bathroom. It was a little chaotic, but we made it work. We had to share the kitchen, and just all the cupboards were basically empty, and we all just kind of claimed a cupboard, a spot in the fridge. Our beds, I believe they're called hot beds if I'm not mistaken, and so basically that bed is ours, and it's strictly ours, versus if you're a cold bed is basically one that you will claim for the night, and then when you leave it's open to anybody. So I was able to have my own bunk, you know, set it up, get sheets for it, and have my own little designated spots and drawers and space in the closets to hang up my uniforms or my extra clothes. What was provided was we had a hot bed, we had kitchen supplies, provided toilet paper and paper towels, tissues. Didn't have to go out and buy like pots and pans. We just had to buy our personal necessities, which is like shampoo, conditioner, toothbrush, toothpaste, and sheets for our bed, and maybe bring your own pillow. Other than that, you just pay for your groceries. I paid $400 a month. For me, that was kind of expensive, especially coming out of training. But I had time to save money. A lot of people came into training not having any money saved. I want to talk about mental health. I think this is really, really important, especially because I knew prior to this job that it's not easy if you don't do well alone, if you have children, or just a loved one in general, if you're used to like being around your family a lot. I don't want to dwell too much into this because it was a rough time for me, but I never really opened up to many about this. For my first months being based in Anchorage, I was pretty depressed. You can be depressed and nobody can ever know and tell that you are. It's kind of easy to hide, and with being depressed, like it affects like your everyday routines and the way you live life. I would consider myself depressed. So my experience was, after my boyfriend had helped me move everything, he did stay with me for like a day in Alaska with the hotel we were provided. After my boyfriend had left, I was living kind of my hotel situation the rest of that week, and then I would go to my crash pad. And while I was in that hotel, I did get assigned my very first trip. On the first day of flying, was able to leave and, you know, go fly and stuff, and that was great. Like the transition into training to working was fine, but in terms of being away from home and being based somewhere where I'm not living was really, really rough. I am not gonna lie to you. Coming from someone that has lived alone, that likes their alone time, I don't mind being alone. On the days I wasn't working and I was just kind of on call, I was sitting around essentially doing nothing. And I just want to say, like, I don't intentionally want to do nothing, and although my classmates were there with me going through the same thing, it was hard to match up our schedules with, like, you know, the same days off. I did run into them like at the airport or at my crash pad, but for the most part it was really hard to match up days off and hang out. Number two, I didn't have a car. I couldn't go out exploring, and even if I could go out exploring. Three, I didn't have very much money. I was living off the remainder of my savings that I had gotten through training with, and I was getting close to running out. It was rough. I felt incredibly lonely, even though I wasn't alone at times. Like, I was flying and I was working, seeing people in passing, like hanging out a bit sometimes, but for the most part I never had felt more alone in my life. That's coming from, like I said, someone that likes to be alone. I consider myself very independent, grew up isolating myself, so, you know, I'm used to that kind of way of life, and I felt like I was missing out on so much, like feeling normal. Like, it was so weird. Like, I had all this time, because on your reserve days you don't always get used. Sometimes I was just sitting in my hotel for 2 to 3 days and I would just eat and sleep. Like, I could not tell you how much I slept. I slept so much. I had no motivation to go do anything. I wasn't working out. I was eating kind of, but like I had no desire to eat. I felt lonely. I wanted to be social, but I felt antisocial at the same time. It was weird. It was a weird time for me, but I got through it. I got through it. You know, there were days that I was able to borrow a car and I went thrifting and I was trying to do things that felt normal to me, that brought me joy. I was trying to like get into reading again, and I just completely felt lost almost. And I know some people are like, well, why don't you just go fly home? Like, you weren't doing anything. Well, I had to be in base for my reserve days, even though they didn't use me. And on my days off, I had about 2 days off in between certain reserve blocks, so it wasn't enough time to go home. Even if I did go home, I'd have to come straight back, and that's just a lot to navigate. I couldn't imagine, and I applaud those that have children, especially because I had some classmates that were in the same situation I was in, but they had children at home crying and getting upset with them because they weren't there. I don't want to get too in detail with, you know, people's personal stories, but like, those were real things that had happened, and some of these parents made it through and some parents dropped out altogether and be with their family. And then there's social media, of course, and the comparison that happens, and I'm just watching everyone like live their normal life and do the things they enjoy, but I felt kind of stranded and stuck in this little hotel room, sometimes my crash pad, because eventually I did move into my crash pad. I felt fine when I was working, and on my layovers, like that felt normal to me. It felt okay. Like I was able to navigate through that like super easy. It was totally fine. I love the state of Alaska, but I did have not so fun experience in broad daylight at a Walmart. I was with some of my friends to get some groceries for our crash pads. We were all like sharing a car, and I was kind of harassed by a homeless man. He repeatedly came up to me probably like 4 times. I'm not going to go through the whole situation, but eventually it didn't end up with one of my classmates screaming on the top of her lungs like to make this person go away. As a woman, like I could say no and people just don't listen. Like it sucks. But anyway, so that had happened and it made me kind of scared to go out. Like I said, I went through that depressive state, so I had no motivation to really work out. And I feel like with the stress and, you know, just my eating habits and like not being active, oddly I had lost 10 pounds. And of course I stopped lifting weights too. Overall I wasn't feeling like myself, but there is a bright side to all of this. The amount of stories that were shared, like living in a crash pad and bonding that had happened during this time. People want to call it trauma bonding, like if you want to call it that, sure, but like we just truly bonded during this time. The people you go to training with and, you know, live in crash pads with, like you will make lifelong friendships through this experience for sure. You'll figure it out together. I don't want to talk too long about that, but long story short, it was really sad to see people go. It was really hard navigating through that period of time mentally, just finding motivation and trying to find that normalcy. Let's check that off the list because I don't really want to talk about that anymore. It was really rough, but I was truly happy with my job. I don't want to drag it too much. There is light at the end of the tunnel. Like it's not this for everyone. Like this is just my experience. And in the first month I was able to fly to Hawaii again. Alaska as a base, I've loved it. I loved it so much. Hi from editing Marina. I totally forgot to mention one of the most exciting things I did while on reserve in Anchorage and my very first months as a flight attendant. So as most of you know that in June is Pride Month, and with my company I was able to volunteer in the Pride Parade as a dancer, and that was so much fun. So on my off days I would go in and practice, and I went to about like 3 practices and a little dress rehearsal. Super fun way to connect with many people outside of just being a flight attendant, but mostly that work for the company in general. I did film that footage a little bit, but I will put it here on the screen for you guys to watch. But I just wanted to share that was something really exciting that I had the chance to do. And I quickly want to get into the plus sides. Now I don't want to be all negative about my months in Alaska. Like I was able to see a moose for the first time. Alaska has this museum and it's amazing. If you're employed by my company, like they actually let you have free admission to this museum. And so I took my boyfriend and it was such a fun time. With the state of Alaska, it is a smaller base. It was a great first base. I loved it. The people were nice. They're very helpful. They are willing to give you a ride to and from the airport. I did get a few rides and I don't want anything in return. I have like pictures and videos of all of my experience of flying while in Alaska, so I will gladly kind of post it here on the screen as I'm talking with y'all. For my second month of flying, since I had a line, I kind of knew where my layovers were. I had picked up another Hawaii just for the fun of it. I was like, you know what, I need some sun. The girl has been depressed. Like she needs to go to the islands. A specific trip I want to bring up is I had a 4-day trip that had a double Las Vegas layover, and I've been to Las Vegas before. It's not my first time there, but my boyfriend has never been to Las Vegas, so I was able to bring him along with me on my working trip. And I said, you know what, while I still have a line, like let's go, like you've never been. And so he was able to just commute with me to Alaska. My first layover was like 18 plus hours. My second layover was like 22 plus hours. He was able to stay for both, so we had technically like 2 nights together. He pretty much kind of went for free, I guess, because of my benefits. That's like a really big positive to having a line and being in Anchorage. Forever one of my favorite memories. I kind of touched base on like the commuting part. Commuting got easier The second month, when I had a line, I had kind of more days open, and I was able to kind of consolidate my trips like back to back to back to back and have them like 3 to 4 days long, so that way I didn't need a crash pad, and that's how I was able to get rid of it too. I had more days that were confirmed off, basically. Like June, I had like more of the beginning part of the month off, and then towards the end I had most of my flying. For that month, I was just commuting in and out of Anchorage just for my trips, and I wasn't necessarily staying there very often, or having to stay there unless I had a trip that left, you know, super early in the morning. Then I did have to come like a day early, but like other than that, having a line made commuting a lot easier. And so being reserved, it is a little challenging, so that's just a heads up for that. All right, y'all, so I think it's appropriate to kind of work in budgeting into this video, receiving my first paycheck, stuff like that. I'm not gonna get in specifics of like my pay and all that. That's way too complicated, and if you're a flight attendant, you know why. I had like a year and a half to save money, and I was able to save around, I think it was over $3,000. I would highly recommend more if you can. I have like 10 years of customer service, so I've been in and out of a lot of things. I think my longest running job was, I was a preschool teacher for 6 years. In terms of job, right before I was a flight attendant, I was cleaning homes, and I was doing it for the money, because I tell you what, like being a cleaner for a house, you make bank, especially tips. So basically what got me through training from March all the way to my first paycheck, which was June, literally was the tips alone. I was running very low for the month of kind of like May, June, and so that's why I had ditched my crash pad for June, because I could not afford to pay $400, because I was quite literally running out. I was scraping by right at the tail end, right before I was about to get paid. If you're on a budget, if you're good with money, like you're able to stretch your dollar, and that's what I was doing. And I had ditched my gym membership, all of my subscriptions, in terms of like I wasn't paying for even like Apple Music. Like I got rid of that. I had like a fitness app as well that I would use in combination with the gym. We had gotten rid of that. I think we had got rid of our internet too. We get paid once a month, but there's this thing where you kind of get like an advance and get paid twice a month, but I don't do that personally because it kind of messes with things a little bit in terms of like, depending if you were to ever like leave the company, essentially owe the company money, and I don't know, it was just way too complicated that I didn't want to do that. I got my first paycheck for the month of May in June, so my savings had to carry me in that month of May. Even though I was working, I wasn't getting paid anything yet until the month prior. Even when I did get paid, it was like the 20th, like towards like the end of the month. Budgeting and being frugal, you really got to figure things out and how bad do you need them in your life. I felt like I kind of made some sacrifices, but you know what, in the end it was all worth it for me. I would highly recommend that if you are gonna consider getting into this job, that you are financially supported in some way, and whether that's like somebody else, your significant other helping you, and savings. Because I mean, you could have a job and still like maybe do training, but I just couldn't see that possible for me. There was like someone from my class that did that, and I applaud them. First off, they had to do it because they had no savings, so you know what I'm saying, like you just figure it out and you just do your best. And there's my cat, she's like cleaning herself right now. What are you doing, baby? What are you doing? So keep that in mind when you are considering this job. Of course, will not apply for everybody, but it is something that is talked about a lot, pay, and just kind of making sure, you know, you got that savings before you go into training, because most of it's unpaid. Personally, I do my budget. Like, I don't know if anyone else does. Most people I talk to don't, and I manually type in my budget. I know that's not that common, and a lot of people I talk to are like, whoa, like I could not do that. Well, me, I like it old school. Now, I can put the link down below of which one I use. There might be a discount code for it too, but it's super affordable, and I personally love it, and I keep track of, you know, my spending that way. I like to be mindful, even though I'm not technically like doing like crazy math, but if I'm physically typing in everything I'm purchasing, it's just kind of brings that awareness. Or if you need that wake-up call to like, oh snap, like I'm spending a lot of money. So I just like to visually kind of keep an eye on it that way, and just make sure I'm actively, you know, knowing what my spending is looking like. And luckily I'm in a situation where I don't live alone, and I am able to split my bills with my boyfriend, and he actually took on the responsibility to pay a little bit more of the rent and some bills that we had. He was willing to help me through this transitional period going into this new career path, in addition to my $3,000+ in savings and just selling stuff. I sold a lot of stuff on Poshmark and just around my house, like just trying to make, you know, the most of it. Finally, we reached July. I make it to my desired base, which is Seattle, and my very first month of flying was rough. I'm not gonna lie. I had the worst first week going into Seattle. Seattle, like, that's a whole different beast compared to Anchorage, Alaska. Seattle flying, if you know, you know, that's a huge airport itself and a hub for quite a bit of airlines too. Y'all, I was getting used left and right. I was worked. It felt like a lot because I was used to, you know, my life in Anchorage, and it was really chill. In July, I did my very first airport standby. I was tagged after flying. Like, I never knew the trauma and the nightmare of being tagged after flying. Like, actually, for the first time, I cried because of the actual job. Not because of my mental health, but it was because of the actual job. Now going on a 7th month, and I can say, like, easy peasy. Like, I'm totally used to the vibe, the flying, like the busy, crazy stuff going on in SeaTac. It's all good now. Oh, in my first month of coming to Seattle, so on probation, we get a total of like 3 strikes you're out kind of thing. We get 3 occurrences, as they call it. Luckily for my whole probationary period, I didn't get any occurrences until my first month in Seattle. Holy smokes, y'all. So I don't live very close to SeaTac, if y'all are wondering. I actually live further up north. I usually would leave like an hour and a half to my report. It was working out great, and then all of a sudden one day I left to work and it took me 2 hours to get there. And so anyway, I was just like, what in the world? I was like, I called crew schedule the first thing I could, and I said, hey, I'm calling and I might be late, but like, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna be late. I'm gonna definitely need a pre-boarder. I think I made it like 30 minutes late technically. It wasn't that bad, but I still got an occurrence for it. So anyway, your girl survived probation. Only got 1 occurrence the whole time. So that was great. But other than that, I was stressing that day. You just can never predict traffic, so just always prepare. So ever since that day, I leave 2 hours prior to my report time, always. I don't know if I mentioned this, but I was doing AM reserve in Anchorage, and then here in Seattle, what makes sense for my schedule, I do PM reserve, and it's been working out great. Other than that one time it took me 2 hours, but hey, we got it all figured out. Trial and error, y'all. Trial and error. In October was the end of my probation, so it was October 22nd to be exact. In my previous video, I had mentioned that I had a very slow month. October is just like a really slow month, and November has been too. Right now it's November, and I've been picking up flying. Like, I don't even do that on my days off. Like, it's crazy. On that 6th month, I had a 5-day block. So I had 2 days off, a 5-day block of reserve, and I think I had like 3 days off or something like that. That 5-day block, I got like airport standby like maybe the first day, but I didn't do a thing. I just went to the airport and I sat. Like, I was just working on my personal stuff, and they had nothing for me to do. No pre-boards, no trips, no nothing. I went home and I sat at home for 4 days. In total, I didn't fly for 11 days, y'all. I forgot how to do my job, felt like. I really didn't, but like, it almost felt, I was like, what? I felt confused. That pretty much wraps up this video. There's a lot more I could talk about, and if you guys have further questions, feel free to DM me. Leave a comment down below. I'll try to get back to y'all. Today's a day off for me, so I'm just chilling at home with my cat. Actually, I had a reserve day today, but somebody picked it up for me. So, but I hope you guys find this video helpful. Please, please, please don't be shy. Stay a while. Subscribe if you haven't already. We got more videos coming out. This has been fun, but I would like to go. Cheers and happy holidays if you celebrate, and we'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.